Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Leadership Launchpad's Pick a Mix podcast. We have got the great Kate Jones with us today, who I'm sure you'll recognize from her image. And she, as we know, is a prolific author. She's written some of definitely the books that have driven my kind of professional understanding, certainly of retrieval practice. I thought, if I'm honest, I thought I knew a lot about it. And I think I might have even taught some people about it. And then when I read the books, I thought, oh, maybe I don't know as much as I thought I knew. So thanks for that. You've made me, sound even more smarter.
I'm sure you did know a lot.
Maybe. So you've got an interesting kind of life at the moment because you're a senior associate for teaching and learning with evidence-based education.
Yeah, and that's a part-time role. Yeah,
part-time
3 days a week.
Well, let's start a little bit about that. Tell us what that role entails.
Yeah, that's an amazing role. I feel very lucky. I work from home with that as well, so it's very flexible.
Right.
But I do tend to go to lots of schools and events. Evidence-based education, for anyone who's not aware of them, it's the Great Teaching Toolkit. So the Great Teaching Toolkit is an online professional development platform. But in 2020, Evidence-Based Education published the model for Great Teaching Evidence Review. Now that is really an impressive document. It's free to download on the evidence-based.education website, and it has different dimensions of what great teaching looks like. So the 4 dimensions, and each dimension is broken up into different elements. At the time I was in a school, I was taking that, applying that. I work with Stuart Kime, Rob Coe, these wonderful people. Yeah, my role is different to theirs. So Rob and Stuart, CJ, they authored the evidence review. And Stuart's the Director of Education, Rob, Director of Research. I am there for more of the classroom application. This question that we regularly ask, what does it look like in the classroom? Can you use classroom examples? So I've been bringing basically my classroom experience to this role. And it's really fun. It's really enjoyable. And you can read lots of my blogs. I write for them regularly.
That's cool. Not intimidating then, working with Rob Coe.
He's a genius. Honestly, as I write my book, I quote him and I realise he just said that at a Teams meeting. It's not, it's just he comes out with these really insightful, incredible things. And he's
I had him on the podcast a few weeks ago, and again, I was just like, be careful what you say, Chris. Be careful what you say. But he's such a down-to-earth guy. I mean, we all aspire to, him and Dylan William, innit? Like every word that come out their mouth is like a soundbite. You want to start scribbling it down.
Well, do you know Dylan William trained him on his teacher training year?
No.
Yeah, I know. So they've got a connection. He was like, I was trained by Dylan William. Oh, of course you were, Rob. Of course.
Of course you were. What did you do before this?
Yeah, so I still call myself a teacher. I still spend a lot of time in schools because I'm a governor at a school in Birmingham. But before evidence-based education, I was in Abu Dhabi. Before that, I was teaching in Wales. So I'm a secondary history teacher. Taught lots of other subjects. But 6 years in a village rural school in North Wales that I absolutely loved the school. But I love travel. And I was one of those teachers who went out to the Middle East. And the plan to stay there for 2 years ended up more like 5.5. It was also during the pandemic. And then in 2021, right at the end of that year, I moved back to the UK, and that's where I'm based now.
Nice. Oh, that's good. Well, let's get stuck into the podcast. For those that are new to this, Kate's selected some sort of fast friends questions, some ignition points, and some launch pads that we're going to kind of explore. We'll just go through them kind of bit by bit, and then when we get to the launch pads, I'll flash up some slides and I'll talk you through kind of where my head was at when I made it, and then we can ask Kate why she chose those. But let's get started with our first kind of fast friends question. And so Kate chose the question: if you could have dinner with anybody, dead or alive, who would it be? So who's your dinner date, Kate?
I'd love to say someone in education, because there's so
Yeah.
many people I would love to have dinner with. So
Yeah.
this is tough. But my
Go on.
answer is Paul McCartney.
Oh,
I
nice.
love him. Went to see him in concert. Love the Beatles.
Right.
Love him as a person, his music.
Yeah.
So that's, not
Okay.
my intellectual answer, but that's the honest answer.
I love it. What would you ask him? What would you talk about?
Well, I was thinking about this when we saw him in Manchester not long ago performing. In between each of his songs and sets, he was just sharing stories
Or is
about,
he?
oh, I was friends with Jimi Hendrix, and he was, and stuff like this, and then talking about George and Ringo and John.
Yeah.
So I really would just listen and
Yeah.
take it all in.
Yeah.
I probably would have questions for him, but I love the stories about. And also, as well, when you think about it, the Beatles, how long they were together, a small part of his
I know. I
life
didn't
in
realize
terms of the
that.
time frame,
Mm.
but they've obviously been a huge part of his life. So,
Yeah.
I just think he's great. And I love Liverpool. I'm from Wrexham, which is not
Right.
that far from
Yeah.
Liverpool.
No.
And I've got a complicated relationship with Liverpool because I love the place, I love the people, but I support Man United. So when Man United play, although they're not doing very well,
Yeah.
Liverpool, my stomach is in knots. Um, but yeah, I love Liverpool. I love Paul
What are you
McCartney.
going to do the year after next when Wrexham are in the Premiership?
I know. I'm so proud of Wrexham. It's amazing that all my friends have
I'm
pretty much
obsessed.
met Ryan Reynolds. All the friends that live
I
in
am
Wrexham.
obsessed.
Yeah. So anyone
Yeah.
who's not aware of the Wrexham journey,
Yeah.
it's on Disney. You should go
Get
watch it.
on
It's
there. It's brilliant.
brilliant. Yeah.
Well, that's great. Right. So Paul McCartney is the dinner date, and
Yeah.
so the next thing we're going to talk about is what we call an ignition point. So something that's happened to you in your life that's caused a transformation, but in a positive way. And this is where I hope the podcast takes a step away from normal kind of podcasts, in that we're interested in the lives behind the leaders. How did people like yourself and Rob and all that get to where they got to? And so tell us a bit, what was life like before the ignition point? What happened, and then what was it like afterwards?
Yeah. So when I was teaching in the UK, I held different leadership positions as well as being a classroom teacher. Then I moved internationally, and that move involved becoming a classroom teacher again without the leadership role. Um, Obviously, the context of the Middle East, and it was actually more money than in the UK with a leadership role.
Yeah.
And I was happy about that, full time classroom teacher. However, after a year being a full time classroom teacher, I wanted to get back into leadership.
Okay.
And there were different positions that had come up at the school that I was working at. And yeah, my ignition point is me ultimately not getting, not
Oh,
just
right.
one, but not getting these roles. And
Multiple.
also, just to give a bit context, internationally, I was tied to this contract so
Right.
that it's not a case of, well, okay, I'll just apply somewhere else.
Yeah.
So then I've got to stay at this school for another 2 years.
Yeah.
So the challenges that
Tricky.
come with that, and I think people, when they are going for an internal promotion,
Yeah.
really need to give it a lot of thought, because I've known people say, I'll throw my hat in the ring,
Yeah.
I'll give it a go, but then if you've got to stay there, that's different to
That's really interesting.
applying somewhere an external school. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And so not getting the job was the ignition point, but how did that change you?
Yeah, well, jobs plural. So it was head of house roles that I went for twice, and I was pretty confident. I thought I would get the
Okay.
roles, and it changed me for several reasons. I was really bitterly disappointed and
Yeah.
upset. Also, just the way it was all handled. So I had an email about 8:30 in the morning to say I'd been unsuccessful, and then I'm about to just take the register with my class. So that was really awful. And
Yeah.
then I'd also gone for another one. I said, look, can I just say in advance, if I'm not successful, if you do want to email me, can you email me at 3:30? and
Right.
I'll just leave and go home. And they were like, thought that was a bit of a weird thing to say in an interview because you should, but I just sort of put it out there.
Well, yeah.
I know I didn't get the job, and I got the email at 8:30 in the morning, to
Oh,
let me know. So the experience wasn't pleasant, but also I felt really frustrated that I wanted, as happy as I was in the classroom, I felt like I could offer more,
yeah.
and it was really clear that this was not going to happen for me at this school.
Right.
And I had to stay at the school. I was contracted at the school. I like the students and so on. So the reason why it's a big turning point in my life is because I really thought, I'll take ownership of my own professional
Nice.
development and success here. And that's where I wrote my first book, Love
Right.
to Teach. I thought, right, okay, well, I'm full time. I'm in the classroom. I don't have additional responsibilities. I will, I've enjoyed writing blogs and articles people have suggested. I'm going to go for it. Now is the time to do that.
Yeah.
And then writing the book led to me speaking at conferences. For example, I was invited to go speak in Hong Kong and things. All these
Yeah.
opportunities really opened up for me. And I realised I loved writing about education. I loved all the things that come with it. And then that's completely steered my career
Wow.
in a different direction
Yeah.
to if I'd have got that job. I
Yeah.
would have given everything to that leadership role. I wouldn't have written a book.
Wow.
And actually, I don't think, and now on reflection, that um, I wouldn't, well, I know I wouldn't have enjoyed that as much as I enjoy
What you're
my
doing
career
now.
now. Yeah.
How fascinating. Well, there's a couple of lessons in there, isn't there, for leaders? I mean, I think a lot of times leaders underestimate things like when to communicate, how to communicate, um,
Yeah.
and also, I mean, my doctorate's in self-efficacy, so confidence, and so I bang that drum as much as I can, but I think leaders also underestimate the power that a dent in confidence can have on someone's overall performance.
Absolutely. A friend of mine at the school had an email we were on our lunch in the staff room. And she checks her phone and she got the email to say she was unsuccessful for that internal promotion and burst out
Yeah,
crying. And she
yeah,
felt
of course.
humiliated and embarrassed. And at this point, I'd already raised it
Mm.
twice as an issue. And I was just becoming so frustrated at working at a school that I was very honest about raising concerns, giving feedback, and it just being completely ignored.
Yeah,
So then, when I had the opportunity to leave, I obviously thought this is a no-brainer for me as well.
yeah.
So I was out of there.
And then the other one, I suppose, probably more, and not just leaders, but anybody, is that kind of one door closes, another one opens
Yeah.
sort of thing that if you can, I was talking to my son recently, a launchpad for the next volume is called short-term parking. And I'm just playing around with this idea that, when you're feeling an emotion, you shouldn't reject that emotion, but only give it a short-term parking ticket. Do you know what I mean? Don't let it hang around. Um, and I think that's interesting about, yeah, lean into the frustration, lean into the disappointment, but as quick as you can, try and see where there's some silver linings. Um,
Yeah. Absolutely. I've taken lots away from that experience. I then went back to into leadership roles and I
right.
was aware of all these things. But yeah, one of the things that I also took away from that specific example, something I've written about, I talk about, is I was very passionate about teaching and learning.
Right.
You've read my books about
Yeah.
retrieval. The internal promotions I was going for were pastoral. And I didn't have any constructive feedback other than really, but you're a teaching and learning person. You like teaching and learning. And that never really, I didn't really understand that. And because in a school, still now, not always, but it's pick a lane.
Right.
Maybe more in secondary then.
Yeah.
You either academic pastoral, and
Yeah.
then you go head of department and head assistant head teaching and learning curriculum and so on, or you go head of year route.
Yeah.
But if you want to be a head teacher, you're academic pastoral.
Yeah.
So I do think we need to have a bit of flexibility. And anyone who's passionate about teaching and learning has to be passionate about pastoral because it's a huge part of their role. You might
Yeah.
not have the same interest. You might not want to read the pastoral books as much as the teaching and learning. That's fine, of course it is. But even if you have a pastoral role, the teaching and learning feeds into that. because you're still a classroom teacher, you work with teachers. So I've always been against the fact that it's one or the other, and
Yeah.
you can't do one because you're good at the other.
Yeah.
It was like a punishment. I'm so interested in teaching and learning that
Yeah.
no way can you have a pastoral role. Stay
No.
in your lane. So that's
Yeah.
something I've taken, and I've included in my book. I've written about that several times across books and at conferences, and so it was a really powerful experience in my life. I like how you phrase it as an ignition moment.
Yeah. Well, I think like most of these podcasts, I tend to have a pad next to me because there's always more launch pads kicking out. But that idea of like get out of your lane
Yeah,
is, or even take people out of their lane. If you're
yeah,
a leader, if you want to grow head teachers, then you have to put people in different lanes at some point. Otherwise, they're not going to be equipped enough when they get to the top. Yeah,
absolutely.
interesting stuff.
That's it.
All right, well, let's dip into your first launch pad. So I'm gonna, for the purposes of the people that are watching this, I'm going to share my screen so we can see the kind of the graphic. And so Kate chose this one, which I'm pleased with because actually it's the one my wife dislikes the most.
Oh, really?
She said, I like that one. I'm like, oh, great, it's the first one in the book. What? You could have told me that before I chose the order. But when I wrote it, I was reading a lot of Brene Brown, like Dare
Yeah,
to Lead, great stuff, wasn't it? And I remember chuckling to myself as I was listening when she was kind of like, if I see one more office reception with an eagle or something that says courage, I'm going to
yeah,
lose. And she's such a big swear, isn't she? But so I wrote this idea, this concept of, the impact of vision statements, posters, and these kind of 3-word pledges is great, but they're kind of dormant unless you actively kind of live them. And so I was playing around with this idea that, it's not, and we talked, don't we, now about, live it, don't laminate it, that sort of mantra. But I started thinking, I wonder what that would mean. And so I was playing around with this idea that, if you visited a school and they did have these 3 words or a poster or a mission statement, what would you be able to see that demonstrates it? And so, if we took trust, would you see people being delegated to? Would you get a sense of autonomy? If respect was one of their words, would you see a lot of collaboration from the top down? And then if ambition was one of their words, would you get innovation and lots of kind of, well, a bit like we just talked about, this idea of talent mapping, where's our future? Where are our future leaders? What are we doing to support them? So I played around with then, okay, well, what would you feel? And then what would you sort of hear? But why did it resonate with you, this one?
yeah. I felt a bit bad picking it because it's the first one. I did look at all. I did go through. No, because I really liked it. And what you said there about live it, don't laminate it. I've heard
Yeah,
that before about teaching and learning posters. But in terms of the values, I in my previous school that I was at, I think it was wonderful school, and I think this is something that they got right.
right,
So in terms of the different values and approaches, and one of them was about teacher workload, and the
right,
senior leaders really took it seriously, the mental health of teachers, workload and well-being. And it was all through school, primary, secondary, and then we had a head of primary, head of secondary, and then a head of the whole school, Mark Lepard. And he is just a brilliant leader to work with. And I always say with because I felt
yeah,
like I was working with him, not,
nice,
you know, for him.
yeah,
And he absolutely enabled all these things. So, there's approaches he had about emails and how there was cut-off points, and you wouldn't hear from him after the 5 p.m. unless it was an emergency. There was some exceptions, perhaps, and also you would see him leaving at the end of the school week, not long after the students with his golf clubs, saying, "Right, I'm off to go play golf,"
yeah,
and he's absolutely fine with you walking out the door with him. He wants you to do that. He wants you to have a
yeah,
nice weekend. He wants you to enjoy life in the UAE and to be the
yeah,
happiest that you can be. Also, give your all to teaching, and he was there. He was visible every morning. Every
Right.
morning he was greeting the students, the parents. He was still teaching because he loved teaching. He's a PE teacher. He knows everyone's names, and he's just he is somebody who, as an individual, as a leader, did fantastic with this, but also the whole school. And from even before I applied, so this might be a launch pad, another one for you, because we talk
Go
about
for it.
red flags. Let's look at the green flags when you
Okay.
go into a school. And when I was applying to the British School of Alcobaira, lots and lots of green flags. The
Okay.
communication was timely, so it wasn't another school. This is what school I never worked at, but I applied for, and I was invited for interview, and they emailed me Friday 4:30, said, "Yeah, you've been congratulations, selected for interview, and the interview's on Monday.
Right.
We'd like you to prepare a presentation. We'd like you to, analyze this data and this
Yeah.
self-improvement plan." And it just sucked up my whole weekend. And I went to that interview, but I wasn't really happy about that. I thought, just you just know that I've got to just give up cancel all my
Yeah.
plans. That's a little bit of a red flag here. So
Absolutely.
when I was applying to the British School of Alcobaira, the communication, they gave me plenty of time. They gave me lots of resources and support. They also sent me their policy they had about interviews, and
Oh,
how for them it was very much a two-way process.
yeah.
It's about the impression they create and how they want to make anyone applying feel welcome and
Yeah.
comfortable and secure. And I really felt that. I remember after the interview, I thought, if I don't get this job, I will be really
Gutted.
gutted, but I'm also happy. I finally had a nice experience of an
Yeah.
interview, one that was really enjoyable and interesting.
Yeah.
And I thought I needed this because I've had a few bad ones,
Yeah.
really bad interviews. Just ugh. So I just, when I saw this, the words are cheap, and on paper,
Yeah.
I thought, yeah, I know what it's like to work at a school where you see it from the
Yeah.
leaders, you feel it all around from the communication, the interactions, and you hear just being resonated, because
Yeah.
it's so easy to just have values, especially when they all start with the same letter,
Oh,
and
yeah.
they all look great on display.
Yeah.
But to live and breathe and model them is another thing.
Nice.
And I know it's possible because I worked at a school that did just that.
There you go then. Amazing. Well, I mean, I think, one of the things that we hope comes from people listening to these things is that sort of a call to action, I suppose. And so if you're a leader listening to this and you have got, school values or mission statements and stuff like that, have a little reflection about, whether, yeah, a visitor would see, feel, and kind of hear them as they go through. All right. Wow. Let's get on to the next Fast Friends question. So this one is about friendship and what you value in friendship. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, well, I have a best friend, Hannah, and she's very loyal, and I'm very loyal to her. You will
Okay.
not catch us ever talking bad about the other one.
Right.
Hannah will, if there's something she needs to say to me, she will say it to me. And I know that. I like that about her. She's just, she's exactly what a friend should be. And I've been in large friendship groups, and then perhaps someone's absent and they're the topic of
Right.
conversation and
Of
gossip.
course. Yeah.
And that makes me feel very uncomfortable because I think, oh, what about when I'm not here? Um,
Yeah.
yes. So Hannah is she's a great example of a friend, and when I think of Hannah, I think about our loyalty and support. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. So there's that level of honesty, is it, that you value from her?
Yeah, absolutely. And I um I'll ask her for advice and feedback, and she can say at times, "I can see why you're feeling this way, but have you
Right.
ever thought perhaps this is how they see it?" And
Yeah.
gives me that insight. And sometimes, she's always does a bit like, "Oh, I can see," she
Yeah.
just doesn't feel like she's attacking me,
No.
but she does help me, perhaps consider another viewpoint, think about it
Yeah.
a different way.
Funny that, isn't it?
And she's just, because of the loyalty, it feeds into all these other
Yeah.
things. She's loyal, but she's supportive. And because she's loyal, I trust her fully.
Yes.
So
That's really interesting that, one leads into the other.
yeah.
Because I think when we think about like strong friendships, they're not um, they're not just supportive, are they? We do seek these people out to help us grow.
Yeah.
Um, which I suppose there's again a leadership um, lesson there about kind of who are you surrounding yourself with. Do you surround yourself with people who support you unconditionally, or have you got people who you've got trust in and they've got trust in you, where they can be a bit more honest? Yeah, I'd
Yeah.
imagine you need a mixture of both, probably.
Yeah. And also, she makes me feel good about myself. I've
Yeah,
been in friendship groups where I've not been happy, and
yeah,
I've made decisions saying what we've got in common is we were friends in school, but we're very different people now. And
yeah,
sometimes that could be enough to keep you. But
yeah,
then when you grow apart and you're so different, and that's the only thing keeping you,
yeah.
sometimes maybe you have to make that decision as,
Mm,
well, we're not going to fall out here, but we have grown apart. We are different people now. Our lives
yeah,
have taken us in different directions, and that happens. Sometimes it doesn't. You think, I'm going to fight for this friendship. I'm going to
yeah,
invest more time and effort, and maybe you see that as well in the schools that you work at. You think, okay, it's not working out, but what can I do rather than just leave? The
yeah,
things I can do, conversations I can have, or you reach a point where you think, this is not right for me. I probably will be better somewhere else.
yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating.
Should I stay or
Oh,
should I go? That's another
that's a
launch
nice one. Yeah, there we
pad.
go. Need for song.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, let's talk a bit about your second kind of ignition point then. So again, tell us a bit about what life was like before, what happened, and then how life's been different since.
Yeah, so basically, again, I was in Abu Dhabi as a single teacher.
Mhm.
Went out there solo, lived alone, had lots of great friends out there. But then the pandemic hit, and obviously it was lockdown, and I was out there on my own, isolating
Yeah.
at home on my own. And I did write a lot of books during that point. I think there might have been 4 books, which was, good way to use that time. But I think being away internationally, and despite having a friendship group, without friends and family from home,
Yeah.
I really did throw myself into work.
Right.
And I would be teaching. I was head of history, so teaching. You still have a large teaching timetable,
Yeah.
and then you got all your leadership responsibilities. And then I was coming home and I was writing. And then in the evening, because of the time difference, I was usually delivering webinars to the UK, which would be about 7 o'clock Abu Dhabi time
Yeah.
after school in the UK. And then I'd probably, just read an education book, I go to bed and dream about teaching. And it
Yeah.
was just too much, really. There's one thing being passionate, but then I think it was all consuming.
Yeah.
So I moved back to the UK after missing my family, not seeing them for 2 years because of the pandemic. And then a few months after being back in the UK, I met Geoff, who is became very quickly my fiance, and we've had a
Nice.
child. It's been an incredible adventure. But in terms of ignition, and he's brought a lot of things to my life, a balance that I needed. I still have high output. I've still published books. I'm still very
Yeah.
passionate about my job, and he loves that. He's
Yeah.
really supportive. He did train to be a teacher years
Okay.
ago, but after his teacher training year, he was like, this isn't for me. So he went and he's got a different career. So that also means that, we don't just talk about teaching all the
Yeah.
time, which can happen. My two of my friends, they're teachers, and when they drive home from work, there'd be a certain point where they say, right, we can talk about work, and then that's it, because otherwise it can take over.
Yeah.
And I think I also now look at teaching through a different lens. So my latest book, Feedback, we'll send you a copy of it,
Yeah.
focuses on workload friendly strategies. And
Right.
everything I share has always got this workload friendly lens, because I I think some of the things I was doing previously were not sustainable, took up too much time. And I think now I love my time with my partner and my daughter. And there's absolutely no way that I would come home and after school day and not have time with them to do all these teaching and learning things and, cutting and gluing and
Yeah.
laminating and all of that. So I think my approach to the ideas and the content I share is always, even if you don't have a partner or,
Um,
children, you should still have other things in your life and
yeah.
make
Yeah.
room for them. And I did when I first started teaching. I was 21 or 22 when I was in the classroom and I had my friends, but quickly those things, my hobbies, they just disappeared
Yeah.
because teaching took over. I didn't even have television. I was just, I
Yeah.
was, it was everything. So just, being with Geoff has just made me think, reflect,
Yeah.
reevaluate, and think about how that applies to teaching.
Yeah.
So whether it's your hobbies, whether it's your family, whether it's your friends, this should not be a job that takes those things away from you.
Yeah.
And I think any teaching and learning strategy I share, it should be, of course, evidence informed and help move learning forwards. But it has always got to have this focus on being workload friendly and sustainable. I
Yeah.
was picked up by a deputy head teacher at Elford High School, North Wales, when I taught for 6 years. He observed my lesson and gave lovely feedback. But he said this lesson was it's not practical. It's not
Right.
sustainable. I had a PPA the lesson before the observation, and that whole lesson took me
Yes.
the PPA to set up.
Oh God.
It
Yeah.
it was an RE lesson about Christian weddings, and it was like, like organising a wedding type of thing. It was just, and there was all these name cards, and he just stop doing this. I know
Yeah.
it's great and I know it's fun, but you can still have these lessons that are memorable without spending all this amount of time, effort,
Yeah.
and energy. And
I'm laughing because I'm thinking about all the crazy stuff
yeah,
that I did when I was, younger, I suppose, and I don't think I've quite found that balance. Maybe I need to get a Geoff in my life,
we all need a
because
Geoff.
I'm not really everyone needs a Geoff. I'm not sure I've found that balance yet, but I think again from a leadership point of view, um, they almost need to be, I guess, the protector of their staff because, from my experience, teaching, education, it'll take as much as you'll give it.
Yeah,
You'll never be done. It'll
yeah,
never be finished. And sometimes we're our own worst enemies because, yeah, it'll just keep taking and taking and taking. And you need a leader above who, not only on a day-to-day basis, says, I'm protecting you, but maybe in the systems and the processes that they create, they do
absolutely.
that.
And this is another example. Mark, who I mentioned, the head teacher in my last school in the British School Archivate, where I said green flags.
Yeah.
When they have exams or assessment week, they have a series of deadlines. And quite a lot of schools in the UK do this, but not all the schools that I work
Right.
with. So the deadline dates are, well, these are the 2 week window or 1 week window for the assessments. And then there's perhaps another 2 weeks, should we say, or a week, I don't know, for teachers to do the marking. And
Right.
during that window, students, parents, and other teachers are not allowed to ask for results. So,
Right.
and that is really powerful because I've, I remember teaching and the mock exams, and the other history teacher took them home, marked them all that night. I said, I stayed up all night till I got them done. I was like, I haven't even opened them yet. And then students are saying, Miss, the other class have got their results. When do we get ours? And that pressure on
Yeah.
you then to mark, to rush. And even as a head of department, I was not allowed to say to the people in my team, have you marked any yet? Can I look at
Yeah.
those results? No, it was they had a deadline date to give it to me. And then after that, it could be given. And there was recognition that some subjects, like the English, their marking might take longer than perhaps the maths. So we'll schedule the English first. And the, that for me is quite a small thing, really, to just say, don't mention the results.
Yeah.
Students not allowed. No emails from parents. Was
Yeah.
really
It's so
empowering.
interesting.
Yeah.
I was delivering what I thought was some really kind of intellectual highbrow leadership training the other day to one of our schools, and we were going around talking about, when we look at all of the leadership theory, what makes a great leader? And I said to them, can you describe a great leader that you've worked for? And this lady said, yeah, I've got a person in mind. And I said, okay, well, tell us a bit about why they were the best leader you ever worked for. And she said, he always finished meetings on time. And I tried not to be underwhelmed. So I was like, I've just been talking about like really
Yeah.
complex theory over here.
No, but that's important.
I said, tell me about it. And she said, he values us. He values our time.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow. They should put that in a book somewhere. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
but you don't see that laminated on a poster. Maybe you should.
Great.
Yeah,
Maybe you
finish the
should
meeting
keep
on
it simple.
time.
Okay. Well, let's keep cracking on then. So we're going to go into our second launchpad now, which is really interesting. So let me share the screen again. We'll just click through to the next one. So this next one is super interesting because I think I've been guilty of this in the past, and so I'm can't wait to hear what you thought. Now, this, of course, for me, it came from an article that I read from Kat Scutt, who's obviously at Chartered College. And if you're not familiar with it, this will resonate hopefully. But there is this idea that we're all busy and we want solutions as quick as possible. We need to fix things as quick as possible because we've got 10 other things that we need to do. And so it's I think potentially dangerously fallen into, if you can find some research to support your idea, then do it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times you're only looking for one piece of evidence. And sometimes you're not even looking for the evidence. You're just naming someone or naming an organization and say that they support it. And that's enough for you to feel like it's worth doing, and for other people to go, oh, well, if Kate Jones says it, then let's do it, which is not a bad thing. But yeah, and so I was playing around with this idea that what Kat Scutt suggests is that, this evidence-informed practice occurs best when it's a combination of things. That yes, you're taking the evidence, but you're looking at that through the lens of your context.
Yeah.
But the one that I think we miss quite a lot is, and then put it through the lens of your expertise or your staff's expertise. And it's this kind of confluence of those three things that we should be aiming for. So I started playing around with kind of, okay, well, how can I expand on that? And so I was thinking that potentially there's something to do with the collection. So when you're collecting this evidence or whatever you want to call it, research, try and get it from not just external sources, but try and mine some of the knowledge and the expertise that you've already got in your school. Because I would imagine most schools have got people that have taught for over 10 years in them, 10, 20, 30 years, and sadly, it's a lot of these people that feel kind of hidden sometimes because of the new flashy stuff. And so, yeah, be broad when you're collecting it and make sure it's balanced. And then this idea of kind of collation, because not all research or evidence is created equal. Making sure that what you are looking at is relevant to your context, even just to your country. Have a little dig a bit deeper into, how is it collected? Is it reliable? What was the sample size? Some of those sort of simple checks. And then the last one I was playing around with was, do you have a systematic way of, identifying patterns and relationships? Most of us are beset with kind of cognitive biases. Like, oh, I like that image. Oh, right, it's true. And, what have you got in place to kind of stop those things taking over? But yeah, why did it resonate with you, this Launchpad?
Yeah, I've seen you share this before, and I work at evidence-based education. My
Sure.
books are heavily influenced by the evidence base, and I talk to a lot of people and collaborate with people who are in the field of publishing evidence. But you're absolutely right, and I love that diagram from the Chartered College of Teaching by Kat Scutt as well. It's something I've referred to. I like evidence-informed, evidence-led, evidence-inspired. And the teacher and the context and the teacher experience they really do matter. Now, let's look at something like whole class feedback, where I think we need more evidence about whole class feedback. There is some, and I wrote a chapter about it, but I was struggling to find the same volume of evidence as, let's say, retrieval practice.
Right.
But there's a huge amount of teacher enthusiasm about whole class feedback. I was able to get case studies from primary, secondary, PE, maths, history, reflecting on how they don't mark individual books, they'll look at books and then fill in a crib sheet, give that whole class feedback, and how they've been doing this for years. There
Yeah.
was a post by Stanley Road Primary School, Andrew Percival wrote it 5 years ago, and
Right.
they've developed that, but they're still using that approach now. And I think that really has power behind it. So
Yeah.
where there perhaps sometimes isn't as much evidence, but we can hear the experienced teachers saying, I found it to be really helpful. It's helped me with my
Yeah.
adaptive teaching, it's helped my students. That is absolutely, it should not be ignored. And the same with
No.
anything with retrieval practice as well. We've got to remember, so with cognitive science, we have basic cognitive science and applied. Basic is in controlled conditions, perhaps in a lab with
Right.
undergraduate or maybe volunteers or people who are paid,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that is completely different to a school environment. And then applied cognitive science are studies that are carried out in real life classroom environments. And we shouldn't
Okay.
dismiss any of the papers that were done under the
Yeah.
controlled conditions, because classrooms are messy places to carry out research and evidence and so on. So absolutely we can learn from the basic and the applied. But
Yeah.
then when we apply it again, there will be these other variables and these
Yeah.
other factors. And there was a meta-analysis in 2021 about quizzing in the classroom. It said quizzing in the classroom can have an overall positive effect to a medium extent. And it's like, wait a
Okay.
minute, oh, everyone says retrieval practice is brilliant. Why just a
Yeah.
medium? Why not a high, you know, really amazing effect? Well,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
because of all the variables. It
Of
depends
course.
on how often you implementing retrieval practice. What are the questions that you're asking? Are you providing feedback? The
Yeah.
level of challenge. So there are things that can be evidence based and informed, but then the secret to this success is that implementation.
Yeah.
And for the implementation to be effective, you need more than the evidence. You
Yeah.
then need to think about the curriculum content, you
Yeah.
need to think about the students. Interleaving is something that I'm writing about at the moment, and there's a lot
Right.
of research about interleaving, and interleaving in terms of curriculum design in contrast to teaching in blocks and chunks.
Yeah.
But then the history teacher in me, I don't have much experience with interleaving, because
Right.
there is no way I would teach a lesson on Monday about World War One, and then Tuesday World War Two,
Yeah.
and then
And
back
back
to
to
World
what?
War One.
No.
Chronology and
Mm.
the subject trumps that.
Yeah.
So and the research really that has been published. There's lots of examples with English language learning, maths, and science.
Yeah.
So it's not to be dismissive of that, but it's to say, well, in this context,
Yeah.
am I really comfortable doing that? Do I think it's the right thing to do? And sometimes you might have to perhaps go against your gut or go against
Yes.
things you've been doing for a long time, and you might find that it is beneficial. But
Yeah.
then other times, the teacher instinct is very, very powerful and something that should be factored in as well. So I'm all
Yeah.
for evidence approaches, and that's again a green flag. The school that I want to work at next will
Yeah.
be one that is evidence informed.
Yeah.
But there's this idea of we don't want to be controlled by the evidence,
Sure.
completely
Yeah.
obsessed with it, as you say. So I think, yeah, the
Yeah.
nuance, the context.
And there's an interesting link, I think, back to what you talked earlier about what you value. I think that's probably enough with the slides. Let me stop sharing. I think there's a link back to what you talked about in what you value in friendship. In that, I think leaders need to create friendships, if you want to call it that, or relationships where people do feel comfortable to challenge them. In
Yeah.
this instance, a leader says, I think we should do this. And I found a study by, Jones et al. That suggests we should do it. Really, in that situation, you want to have a strength of relationship where someone below them says, well, hold on a minute.
Hmm.
How does that relate to our context? What about this? What about that?
Yeah.
That's, yeah.
I absolutely agree. And I've worked in schools where I've been able to share research,
Right.
and they said, "Thanks for this. This is really helpful. This is really interesting."
Yeah.
And then I've worked in a school that has rejected that. I mean,
Right.
imagine being evidence informed and you work at a school that promote learning styles and then
Yeah.
grade your lessons based on how you adapt learning styles. That's the position that I found myself in at one point.
Wow.
And it was very difficult for me. What do I do? Do I play the game
Yeah.
and get observed doing all the
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
learning
Yeah.
style stuff
Yeah.
to get my outstanding, or do I stick to
And change it.
what I do day in day out, what the
Yeah.
evidence informs me to do, but I'll probably get a satisfactory with it. So I just was like, this is not right.
No,
This is
that's tricky, isn't it?
absolutely not right. So yeah, I think having a culture where you can share things. I think I've worked with lots of schools where the leaders are very open to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Um, and I've worked in schools where the leaders are pushing the evidence movement,
Right.
and it does need to come from the top.
Yeah.
And they sometimes might have a bit of pushback from some classroom teachers, not all. But I've also worked with schools where the classroom teachers are pushing it, and they
Right.
need to get the leaders then on
Oh, I
board.
love that.
So
Well, and I think it's funny actually you say that, because I think we're seeing that. We've seen it for the last couple of years, haven't we? Where kind of the ECT programs are now much
yes,
much more evidence based. And I speak to mentors when we're when they're safe enough, they go, dude, these trainees that are coming up are more qualified than I. I feel a bit underqualified myself. So yeah, that's interesting. It comes up from below.
yeah, that's been a game changer. But also, because I work with so many schools outside of England, this is not the case everywhere.
No.
You think, oh, about retrieval practice and that's been really well implemented in England. Well, I don't. I know schools in Wales are doing it, but in
Right.
terms of schools in Wales, and I'm from Wales,
Yeah.
when I get asked, I'm not hearing as much from Wales. Put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so the differences. And when I write books, I am very aware to use the term ECT, probation teacher, newly
Right. So
qualified teacher.
that's what they call
A
them in
lot
Wales.
of the books that are written for the UK and an international audience uses terminology that only relates to England.
Yeah. Interesting.
So that's just worth knowing
It is.
if you plan to either move internationally or like you're in Bristol, if you move
Yeah.
across the border, very
I'm ready to
different.
go. 20 minutes, I'll be there. Brilliant. All right. Well, let's get on to your last fast friends question, which I'm fascinated. I don't want to give away, but I hope it's Geoff, basically.
No.
That's awkward. So the last question is something around, if your house was on fire and everybody else was safe, pets and family and all that sort of stuff, what is the one thing you would save? So what is it?
Yeah, well, if it wasn't safe, I absolutely wouldn't. There's nothing I care that much about. But you've said it's safe. So I have a famed. It's not Geoff. We'll assume Jeff's outside.
He's gone.
I
Yeah.
have a famed poster of the film "It's a Wonderful Life," the cinema
Okay.
poster that's advertising it. It's a film. Anyone who hasn't seen "It's a Wonderful Life," you have to watch it.
Right.
It's a film. It was released in 1946. It's often shown at Christmas, and it's an amazing film, really ahead of its time with mental health, a man who's really struggling. It also says, a man who's not a failure, who has friends, and it's it's my favourite ever film, and there's a lot of
Wow.
life lessons that we can take from it. And I've got this special poster in the office that is just a nice reminder
Yeah.
of those messages in the film.
How big is it? Would you struggle to carry it out?
Oh, yeah, maybe. I would, yeah, but Geoff will have to come in and help me. Maybe it was pretty
He's got
big.
a role after all.
Yeah,
Oh, that's good.
but it's framed
Um,
and everything, and it's beautiful. I'll take a picture and send it to you.
oh, that would be nice. I'd like that. Yeah. Brilliant. Well, we like I say, sadly, we've come to the end of of the podcast. But I know that obviously, you've got the books and stuff that people can connect with, and if you go onto Amazon and and type in Kate Jones books, you'll get all the series. Feedback's the most recent one, is it?
It is, yeah, and that's research and resources. That's a sort of
Yeah.
theme throughout my books. Yeah.
And there's a big one on glass ceilings.
Yeah, that's a different type of book, taking away these lessons about leadership and smashing glass ceilings, empowering women in education. And I'm going to send you a copy, Chris.
Oh, I'd love that.
It's really, because obviously it's not a book that is just written for women.
No.
It's also anyone, how we can support women in education.
Yeah, love that. And you're on Twitter?
Twitter, LinkedIn,
Yeah.
Facebook threads, Instagram,
Yeah.
Kate Jones_teach. There's
Great.
so many platforms now, Blue
There
Sky.
is. Yeah. I'll put all the links in the chat. And of course, evidence-based education, I'm a massive fan. And I think there's a link there to what we talked about, because sometimes I think when we talk about evidence, there is a reality about how much time working teachers have
Yeah,
got to engage with it. And I've always felt like there's a comfort in knowing that somebody's done a large percentage of the heavy lifting for me. They're not giving me the answer,
yeah,
but for instance, organizations like evidence-based education, you
absolutely.
can trust that.
You can
Take
trust
it,
them. Yeah,
contextualize it.
it's accessible. It's
Yeah,
never been more accessible, the evidence. Yeah,
amazing.
there's a lot of great information out there. Evidence-based education. Check it out if you haven't already.
That's great. And again, if you like all the Launchpad stuff, then connect with me on all the socials and grab the book from Amazon. And yeah, I'll see you at the next one.
Thank you, Chris.